Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the live stream. I'm your host, Tom Kaczynski. We're doing Tom Unscripted tonight, and we are going to try to do something that never works well, which is I'm going to try to use the actual microphone and camera and all the fancy equipment I have, and we'll see how long it is before YouTube nerfs the channel. Nonetheless, it is a way to start the day, so thank you for being here with me. Let me just adjust this a little bit, bring it a little closer. You can see better. Just the camera ever so slightly here. Hopefully not mess this up too badly, and hopefully that will improve the picture ever so slightly. I also want to say, before I get deep into the show here, I want to give a little thanks and credit to my friend Ollie, who actually sent me these beautiful plates in 1776 or to 1976 bicentennial plates from Illinois. So very awesome, and thank you for that. I appreciate them very much. So that was really cool and a fun addition to have to the wall here. So tonight's episode is going to be thematic, and in case you had any doubt, you know it, I know it. We're going to talk about some maps tonight. You know, that makes me excited. And really what I want to talk about tonight is we're going to be talking about the conflict between Russia and Ukraine and who's behind it. What are the players? What are the actors? And we're going to do it just in a broad sort of geopolitical sense, because wars tend to happen in a really big way when accidents like this come about. World War I started over someone getting assassinated in Sarajevo. World War II started because the British made a guarantee to Poland that said they wouldn't be conquered by Germany, only to give them up to the Russians or the Soviet Union to be more distinct. And that is a different group if you know the difference between them. Good to see you, Eki. I'm surprised you don't have a copy of The Coming Civil War. I would have thought you would have, but that's okay. And Grand Flash, good to see you as well. So as we go into this a little bit, what I want to say first off is that as a general rule, you don't poke the bear. And we have our leadership here in the West idea, for some reason, they think that we're going to support international sovereignty. Okay, so here's what it really is. What they support is a system where corporations run things. The democracies are basically just the engines that farm out the people's money and the laws to them. And then they say, we're going to support sovereignty whenever we want, except they didn't in Russia. Remember the Maidan, where they didn't like Yanukovych being there, and they got rid of him for the other guy who was there. So they play these games all the time. Good to see you, Tim. Glad you're here. So what happens is we see people say, oh, well, we support sovereignty in some countries, but then we don't support it in others. And look, America is not the only country that does this. China does this. Russia does this. And we're coming back to something which in the 18th century would have been called the Concert of Vienna, or the balance of powers. Back then, it was a balance between Austro-Hungary, or Austria before that, Prussia, Russia, the UK, and England, or excuse me, the UK and France, rather. Could never exclude the French. Pardonnez-moi. But what we end up having is a balance of powers. And now we're getting back to a balance of powers world, where the balance of powers probably is going to be the US, the European Union of some sort, probably Franco-German dominated, the Russians, the Indians, the Chinese, and we'll see maybe some others will see at the table. So maybe we'll see regional actors, someone step up in Iran or Turkey or maybe a Brazil, who knows? But I think those are the ones we should be keeping an eye on. And I think the UK is sliding back into a second-rate power, save for the fact they own the banks and own the bankers, and the promise that come from that. But let's leave that aside for just one moment while we go through this, because we're not going to tell you what the Crimean War happened. What has happened is a lot of what's happening now between Russia and the Ukraine has a lot to play with American politics. The people who were following the Hunter Biden scandal will have remembered there was deep involvement there with the money and the bribes that were coming through to that family through the Ukrainians. And the problem is Eastern Europe was used by certain financiers in the U.S. for basically since the time Yeltsin was in Russia to go ahead and take advantage of them in a lot of ways. And they did, of course, a lot of many sordid things. So we ended up with a situation where people kind of got sick of it, and eventually Russia got sick of being poked to. And you ended up where NATO, now the promise that was made between Bush to Gorbachev was that the West wouldn't encroach upon the Russian territory. But then they went ahead and they not only made Poland, the Czech Republic, Slovakia, Hungary, all these countries part of NATO, but they also comes down to is a couple things. It comes down, I'm buffering. Okay. Am I back? It looks like I'm back. Okay, so what ends up happening is that Ukraine ends up sliding away from Russia in 1991. A lot of different games get played. The West moves closer and closer to the surface. And what ends up happening is that at some point the Russians decide to start striking back. Now, Crimea was their key port. And if you'll remember in the last round of violence, they basically grabbed it. And look, yes, they took it from the Ukraine. Yes, they had it before the Ukrainians. Yes, most of the people there are Russian. And yes, it makes more sense with Russia, probably. And I know the Ukrainians are pissed, but you know what? Territories changed. And part of what was left as an unresolved bit of that was about something called the Donbass, which is the eastern part of Russia, eastern part of Ukraine on the border with Russia on the Black Sea, basically, places just east of Mariupol, where we're talking about places like Donetsk and Luhansk and all these places. And they are a separate sovereign republic because they didn't want to have to deal with the government and what they wanted to do to them. So what ended up happening was a key ceasefire treaty agreement ended up expiring, I think 2 nights ago now. And before that, the Ukrainian president, in an effort to try to win some support, went ahead and said, we're going to go ahead and reclaim our lost territory. And the Russians are like, no, you're not. And so the Russians have been moving troops in there, and the Ukrainians have been moving troops in there. But this is one of those things where what shouldn't be a huge issue has a tendency to perhaps become a huge pissing contest, because America and UK, actually more than the EU, are getting involved a little bit, at least hinting they will. And the truth is, if Ukraine begins to go ahead and fire on these troops, Russia can use this as the provocation to potentially seize the whole southern coast of Ukraine. And the reason they might do that has a lot to do with naval supremacy and wanting to control their southern underbelly. It would be the same thing as if we were defending New Orleans in a lot of ways. And in fact, that's why we were so concerned with Cuba if you study geopolitics, because Cuba is the last jumping off point from which you can get to the soft underbelly of the U.S., which we should consider, by the way, considering they're still very friendly with the Russians, and between them and the Venezuelans, what's out there. You see this Chinese sub that can shoot off 100 missiles at once, You really have to think about these things, but we don't, because we're arrogant and we're cocky, and the people who stole one country think they can steal the whole world. Maybe they can. Maybe this is part of the plan. I don't know whether it is or isn't, but let's go back to talk about the Russians. So the Russians, when it comes down to it, have been trying to get something involved or started called Nord Stream 2. And basically, this is energy pipeline politics. This is the way the world works. They want to get oil across. The Germans want to buy it. The Russians want to sell it. And the Americans want to interrupt it. So what happens is you start seeing people in this country who have financial interests who do not want to see any sovereignty taken away from the way that pipeline politics works. And that's important, remember, because at least in the old formula, although this is changing quickly and it might be obsolete soon enough, but it isn't yet, the strength of the dollar was caught up in the value of oil. And that's one of the reasons you see them pushing so hard. Maybe it's very possible a beneficial aspect of climate change for the deep state is that they go ahead and make it where oil is more expensive through these sort of measures artificially to prop up the US dollar and the dollar-based system. But the Chinese, Russians, and many others are looking to exit that system. And if you look, they trace the statistics of what percentage of the world currency is held, and it's down to like 60%. We're at that tipping point, where your neighborhood's about to go bad. That's where the dollar's at, and I expect to see that in the next year or two. So if you're heavy into USD, I suggest denominating in something else. Pick whatever you like. If you want to go crypto, look at something DeFi, or maybe in hard assets. Or if you just want to have supplies at home, given the rate of inflation, you wouldn't do too bad. I was out today buying some milk, $8 a gallon for organic milk. I couldn't believe it. And yeah, that's a little bratty, but the thing is, it does make a difference. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. But talking about the cow that got shook from behind, let's go back to Ukraine. So the Russians now are in a spot where they're trying to get this pipeline through. And what's happening is you're seeing a lot of interference. So we've seen an escalation the last couple of days. The Russians have shut the Crimea bridge they've put in there. They've shut off gas shipments into Ukraine. A lot of troops moving in. I think there's like 30,000 as of about 36 hours ago in Crimea and Sevastopol. That's on that little peninsula. And they're saying that's part of Ukraine. And you can argue those things, whatever. Crimea is not going to be given back by the Russians. But what's interesting and terrifying is if you start to think of this from a geostrategic perspective, what benefit is there to the Russians to playing peacefully? And the answer is probably not that much. Do they want to just wait till the West can try to surround them more? I mean, they've seen that they're dealing with bad actors. From the moral perspective, I mean, they go and they fly their rainbow flags over in their embassy saying, we're so thoughtful and we're so that. They don't realize that Russia's a Christian Orthodox country at this point, and they understand evil evil for what it is, and they see that it often goes around looking like a rainbow bright patch. So they don't have that benefit. They have a relationship with China. China wants Taiwan. Russia wants to go ahead and make its coastal holdings on the Black Sea coast more secure. What could happen? A lot of things. And Ukraine, unfortunately and foolishly, for part reasons, their domestic politics, and part that are bad guarantees from Western powers, probably the worst decisions we've been seeing since Britain said, go ahead, Poland, get hold Danzig. I'm sure it'll work out well for you. Ask all the people who ended up dying and from both sides in that war. Ukraine is the sandwich, is the meat in the middle of this thing. So Ukraine is being set up in a position where if they push too hard into this, Russia will have every pretext they need to go in there and strike. And the question is, would they do it? And the answer is, well, I'm not so sure they shouldn't from their perspective, because if you think about it, there really isn't a lot for them to gain for being nice. The thing I think would be, if they do that, and if America starts sending in troops, and this is where it gets interesting, this is what you need to watch over Easter weekend. Russia has said very clearly, very plainly, and very publicly, if NATO starts sending armed troops in to go ahead, if they clearly do this to help the Ukrainians, Russia will see that as an intended act of war, basically, and they may begin to act in whatever fashion they see fit. And remember, Russia first strike doctrine, they're not investing in all these hypersonic missiles so that they can lose a war. How you win a war is important. And the answer is you can win it with a first strike if you can take out your opponent before they can strike back. And we might be dealing with such a scenario. At the same time, we see a lot of activity over there in China. That they've been probing over there, going into the Taiwan Air Defense Zone. And if you understand American military doctrine, what ends up happening is the idea of American military strategic doctrine was to be able to fight 2+ wars at once. But right now, it'd be very hard for us to do that. So, you're stuck fighting a war potentially. Let's just pretend this did break out. The U.S. wanted to fight. You'd be fighting on a Ukrainian front, on an Eastern front. You'd be fighting in China. And don't think Iran wouldn't be a party to this, too. They're going to do something running right over Saudi Arabia. Now, Saudi Arabia can buy lots of good troops, but they can't actually produce them. And this is the problem. Same problem we have in the U.S., actually. I was having a conversation with someone in our chat, and they were saying the Russians are a bunch of tired old men who can't fight. Well, at least they're men who are actual men. We don't even have biological males in our army anymore. We have whatever you want to call those things that they put out there. So when you look at it, I don't have a problem believing the Russians can defend their own. Fighting Russia on Russia's territory is always stupid. And whether you like it or not, Ukraine is Russia's territory. And as Willie says, and he's absolutely right, by the way, fighting is happening in Donetsk right now. And that is accelerating. So I want you to be aware of this. If this gets funny and this gets hot, we may very well see the Russians go ahead and march along the coast of the Black Sea. And from what I've been reading, and this is potentially telling in this whole situation, we are seeing that the Belarusians, which are to the north of them, but allied to Russia, are also beginning to mobilize a little bit. And I think that's pretty important in this. Not because it's necessarily going to happen that way, but because it at least opens up the opportunity that it could. Like I said, I'm not endorsing anything. I'm just simply observing in the commentary and trying to let you guys know what I think is happening out there. So I'm gonna get a good map in front of me while I'm doing this, because it'll make this a lot easier. These maps. I'm trying to do a simple search for a map. I have one up that would be kind of good, but it's not really great here. All right, threat assessment. All right, here, this will work. Divided Ukraine, perfect. I actually have one on my thing that's a little bit better, but y'all can't see it. So basically, if you draw a diagonal line through Ukraine, and you kind of take, if you take the provinces, I'll tell you which ones they are. Anything basically north and west of Kiev thinks it's European. Anything south and east of it, ranging from Odessa, through what's Crimea, Sevastopol, all those sort of places, they consider themselves to be much more Russian. So Zaporozhye, Kharkiv, all these places, Poltava, they have a much longer and deeper, well, Poltava is kind of the in-between point, but they have a much deeper and longer history with Russia. And the danger for Ukraine is, just like what happened with Georgia when something like this happened, I think it was 2008, if I remember right, where you saw Abkhazia and South Ossetia pulled off of there, we may be seeing a similar situation. And the problem is, our idiots who are in charge of this country, or the people who undertook a coup in this country, let's call it Stripe, are trying to think, hey, we can do this all around the world. And I hate to say, everyone knows what happened with this. And so you really have to ask what's happening. And I don't have an answer to this, but I do have a couple observations of things that I think are interesting. One of the things I think is most interesting is every country going into COVID lockdown, despite the fact it isn't that bad, except for the people who are getting vaccines. You read about these women having miscarriages, and I can show you pictures of sores all day. In fact, we share some of the stories so you can see it. But I know you're not allowed to talk about the jab. You're only allowed to say what's out there, and we've already been cordoned off into our little area here so that we, don't have the opportunity to talk about what's actually happening. But what it seems is they might be queuing up a war, because if you think a war is coming, what do? You get people off the streets, and you are seeing country after country in the West say, we're going to lock you down, we're going to put you in martial law. At the same time, you see the drums of war beating. So I don't know what psychopathic plan is out there, but absent some external event which we haven't been told about, which, by the way, you're on the verge of UFO disclosure. I was listening to things about how they've perfected mind control. I mean, anything and everything is on the table. But I would say, when in doubt, and this being Good Friday, by the way, a day we should be considering the reflection of the suffering of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ, that we should also be aware that the path of suffering is often the way that they use to go ahead and pull things forward. What they'll do is they'll make people susceptible to different ideas. And I don't know where it goes from here, other than I hope that God is looking out for us. So that is my beginning of my opportunity of looking at what is happening over there in Russia. And I will tell you, I think Russia is going to advance this, and I will tell you why. I don't see the advantage for them not doing so. I mean, Europe is weak. Countries are sitting at home. The Russian army is there. The Ukrainians are. It's just a dumb play. You don't poke the bear. I don't know what it's about, and I think the Chinese might be behind it. But this is what I keep telling myself: if the Chinese own Biden and the Ukrainians have their claws in him, why would he be doing something so stupid as to be so helpful? Other than the fact that maybe the part of it is he's supposed to make this fail, and that's kind of part of the price of the thing, because you can go ahead and offer up something that isn't yours to offer very easily, which if you're president of the United States, you functionally can do in a lot of ways. Maybe that's what the game is behind this. In the end, I think it remains the same thing. I think it remains human suffering leads to transhumanism. I think we're not too far from a currency collapse either. We're going to see a lot of really bad, awful things coming in the coming year. And I talk about this a lot more. My new book will be coming out, Come Out of Babylon, rather. I should say that. And I've got the edits back, so I'm hoping to have it up this week. We'll see. It may take one more week because I may have some things I have to do. But I do look forward to sharing that with each and every one of you. So what I want to do is I want to talk about some of the scenarios that could play out, and we'll bring up some of your questions. Let me say hi to everyone here. Take a moment here while we're going through this, because this is just a relaxed show. I'm just doing this because you guys like having me here and like to hear what I say. Do buy the books, support that. If you want to support the program, at CVCPRV is the Venmo, or PO Box 35, Greenville Junction, Maine 04442. Give me money while it still has value, right? Or crypto is good. If you're into crypto, shoot me a message on Telegram. I'm in the Atlantic homeland. We are literally just going into this conflict, and you are already making a video. Well, it's not a new conflict. That's the interesting thing. But let me say hi to everybody. All right, Grand Flash, Willie, good to see you. I got you earlier. Tim Dean, glad you're here this evening. Eki says, or you get the palsy. How much physical silver am I buying to hedge against Weimar? Writes Eki. I thought about it, but frankly, I have been of the opinion, and this is not necessarily a popular opinion, but it is true. I think that currency expressed as gold specie or silver specie, all the precious metals, has value for after the conflict's over. But I think while the conflict's ongoing, it just makes you kind of a target. Because if you're the crazy coot that has all the gold and everyone knows that you're living in the van, and I lived in New Hampshire for years, I know that type of person, people will probably just come after you first. So I think you're better off having actual supplies you can use, and then just burying that until after the conflict's done, so you can go ahead and reestablish your wealth. I mean, it's not really liquid. I mean, what do you do if someone, even if you're broke, right? Someone has a jar of milk and someone has a gold bar and everyone's starving. The milk's worth more than the bar. Remember, all markets are transactional, so whatever you have has to be useful for how you use it. A lot of people get tricked and trapped into the idea of thinking things have permanent value. If they have to have permanent value, they have to have permanent utility to you. And it turns out the things that sometimes cost the least might be worth the most. You don't believe me? Remember how much toilet paper cost you last February. Okay, so we'll talk about that a little bit more. And So Ignis writes, we're just going into this conflict, and here we are making a vid on it. So yeah, I've been watching this for a while, and I've been waiting to see it happen. There's a biblical component to this. A lot of people have thought the as mentioned, I want to say it was in Revelation 18, maybe 19. I'm a little fuzzy right now on exactly which one it was, but when you write about the fall of Babylon and you hear about the famous Gog and Magog war that is going to happen, that the Russians will be a party to that. And there are a lot of people who think, I've heard biblical interpretations where Russia is the beast and, the dragon is the Chinese, and you see the potential for these sort of things to be two claws that rip the U.S. apart. And the U.S. is being set up for a fall by its own elite. So I would say this: if the U.S. gets into this fight, my advice to everyone is don't go. You don't want to fight Russia. And if our state wants to destroy itself fighting against some other state, that's the best hope the liberation American people have. And I know that's not going to be an opinion that's going to get me a lot of support, but it is the honest by God truth. We live under a petty form of Maoist technocratic oligarchy, and it's just bad. Nothing good can come of it. It's I don't want to say it's amoral. It's immoral. I mean, it supports things that are just objectively wrong and terrible, and I can't muster any support. I mean, I guess it was just, if I'm going to go on a little rant, if you'll indulge me for a moment. I hate this country, and and maybe that's why I'm wearing my Poland shirt. And I hate that I know that it's a lie from the beginning. I hate that I know as much as I do about the founders and their Masonic background. I hate that the politicians lie and play games. I hate the people who sacrifice good blood and real treasure to go forward. And I hate that we've been led into fighting a whole bunch of wars to make people rich who hate us, who literally are just giving us, they're literally sending out plagues to kill us. Before COVID, okay, and all the games they played with that, they've played all these other games, I'm not convinced all these autoimmune disorders. You all know Dana has Lyme, but there's other ones, lupus, MS, all these things that are just all over the place. Who knows what medical experiments are doing on us? I've been reading about CRISPR technology, and if you don't know what CRISPR technology is, it's basically I can play gene splicing games and write code like it's C++, and they're working at it, and they figured out how to basically change what they want to change about humanity. And when you're starting to see all these problems with fertility problems and all the issues women are going through, you really should know that that's the case of what these problems are, that this is out there. But, before I get distracted, because I was talking about America, I love the American people, mostly. There's a couple of states I'm not so keen on. You can guess which ones. But our country succeeded in spite of our government, not because of it. And if you understand the Constitution properly, if you say, oh, hooray for the Constitution, the first thing we did was we took God out of it. How did you think having godlessness was going to work good? It doesn't work well. It works poorly, and it always was meant to. And you start to realize the state wanted you to worship it. Thank God for the Second Amendment. That was a good one. But a lot of the things people think were so great, liberty has a relationship with anarchy that's disturbing. And if you start to think of what good order looks like and what builds culture and nationhood and truth, it isn't this idea that everyone does whatever they want. It's that you have a common set of principles. And in America, maybe those principles, maybe I'm not fair enough. Maybe they made sense when we had a moral people, but we do not have a moral people. We're not allowed to have moral people. But it's funny, they were having that idiot, that little Nas X. I actually watched the video. Dana had me watch it with her, and we watched the stupid thing. It was vile, but the thing about it was that was religion. That was a recruiting ad for Satanism. It would be no different. You won't see, I don't know, pick a Christian artist. I mean, who would sing? Give me a good Audrey Assad, right? Assad, am I saying? Josh Carroll's perfect example. I'll pick a Christian artist. You'll never see someone like them get cred or street tension because, oh, that's religion. But you always see art masquerade as saying, oh, well, that's not religion, that's just art. Or that's education, or that's just a philosophy. Look, Marxism, Leninism is a philosophy of religion. It's this idea you're going to go back to an antediluvian time, right? The idea of, when we were all in a commune, and you're going to support certain transhumanism, that we're all going to become one with the matter of the universe. We're all starlight. I mean, in all these forms of how should I say, heresy, really deviate in a way where they lose sight of the fact that a moral country. This is not a moral place. And when you start to realize that as the people stop to being moral, governments are not good. There's no good government. the myth that America had a good government is BS. Franklin Roosevelt was a lying communist who literally was sending supplies to the Soviets before our own people. I mean, you could research this thing. And look, I'm picking on leftists, but I could pick on rightists too. Richard Nixon went ahead and enabled the rise of the Chinese Communist Party. I have to forgive me. I'm a little tired today. I was out for quite a few hours. I was out with people, and I'll tell you why this country's done, by the way. I was out having a nice day. It was fine. But people will accept the new normal as long as it's better than the fears they have of what will happen if you actually require change. So I tell you the country's done. And that's okay. You just have to understand it. And if you accept that, then you can begin moving on to whatever your next step is in your plan. We talked about that. Is it to go somewhere else? Is it to pair off? But you need a different civilizational model, and America's civilizational model is broken, and I will tell you it was artificially imposed upon us. The actual models of the people who came over there were like the Virginians had, or like the Massachusetts Puritans had, or the Scots-Irish who were in Appalachia, or the Texans in their constitution. The worst constitution, the whole lot of them, was the federal one, because it took all the power away. I was going to do a show on this, but I'll cover it right now. The Compromise of 1790, imagine this in modern terms. Thomas Jefferson agrees to get the capital moved down to Virginia, or just outside Virginia, where it is today. In exchange, Alexander Hamilton got the right for public financing that led to the creation for the first bank in the United States. And Hamilton, who's celebrated all the time now, by the way, was basically an agent for the bankers all along. And you can see that how he basically kneecapped John Adams, which was the last decent Puritan background person, made sure that Thomas Jefferson was on the take, and ran Aaron Burr out of the country. And yeah, Aaron Burr had some problems. But the idea, if you think about how many people are so happy about Hamilton when he was the consummate banker's banker, you might learn something. He was their generation's Meghan Markle, and watch, that prediction will hold weight as this goes forward. I appreciate that, Eki. I feel the same way, buddy. All right, let's see what you guys are saying. But hey, look, it's my opinion. It's not a free country anymore, but I've been a dissident so long, I'm just going to keep saying what I think is true. All right. Eki writes, note to self, buy more caps for my pop gun and super male vitality pills. Absolutely. Let's see. Ignis writes, we all hate this country. The biggest black pill was for me realizing that America was false from the start and every conflict is BS. Absolutely. Did you see, actually, they had Sergei Lavrov, he's the Russian foreign minister, was out. I'll post this. You guys will love this story, I'm sure. And those of you who are in the actual chat would know this. Let me see if I can find it real fast. It won't be hard for me to find. 1 second. I will have it for you here because I want to share it with you. Russia warns of anti-white aggression in the U.S., right? We've seen anti-white, we've seen anti-Christian, we've seen anti-family, anti-anything that's good. If it's good, our country hates it. But they're like, we need you to go fight for us. Go fight for America. I'm not fighting for America. You know what? The boy fight, and they don't say for the soldiers and the law enforcement people, enemies were foreign and domestic. The enemies are there. And you're there collecting your paycheck from them. That's what it is. I mean, it's not even the Eichmann defense. At least Eichmann had the virtue of actually believing what he was doing, I think, a little bit. These people are just collecting a paycheck, and this is what it is. We have this long ennui, this restlessness that just we are exhausted. I mean, we've been given all these political conflicts. So honestly, for all show, we fought for years under Trump for this or that or the other, and nothing changed. All we ended up doing was getting a tax bill for big corporations. Nothing ever changes in America. Nothing ever gets better. And every generation, basically since about the time Jack Kennedy got killed, has been going on there saying that's worse. And look, maybe he tried to do something real when it came to the Federal Reserve Bank, or maybe he just got popped because he liked to play for Marilyn Monroe the wrong way. Who will ever really know the answer for that question? But what we do know is this long-managed descent has been every step of the way. You wreck the family. You tell women, hey, let's all go work. Let's not have kids. And now we're getting to the point where I predict in the next 10 years, you'll see all sorts of plagues take away women's fertility, so the state will raise all the children. But isn't it better anyway? Because then you can just do what you want. You can build back better, be your best self, have a better life. And it's amazing if you actually understand some of this from just my Christian friends out there. If you listen to the sort of messages that come from people like Joel Osteen and Paula White, they sound just like the ones that come from people like you would see like Joe Biden and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and all her fun ideas that she has, by the way. And also, one other thing, did you see that they have now 4,000 people in the detention camps that they supposedly, that were so terrible for where you're only supposed to have 250 under social distancing. You can go watch Ted Cruz be a pretty entertaining troll when it really comes down to it about this, but that's not covered by the media because the media knows how to manipulate you. And social media is even better because they control a portal into which your mind views things. And that's where we are. We live in the age of peak segregation based upon technology. And that's why we can go into these things. And I'm telling you about Russia and all that because I want you to survive if a war comes. And, it is a shame if there's going to be yet another brothers war, but this is the shame of politics, of people who don't understand culture and why we need a different model to come forward. I do think that having a model that maybe is based on what the Eastern Europeans are doing, like Grand Flash is talking about, might make a lot more sense. I think that's absolutely possible. But I know that the best we can do is get out of the way right now because we can't fix this. And even if we went and fought, because I thought about what it would look like if you actually fought. I mean, look, I wrote The Coming Civil War. I know. You're not fighting for good people and for a good cause. Good people need to learn to fight for one another. We need to learn to come out of Babylon. And who knows? I might put some ideas out there, but we're going to have to put our money where our mouth is. And I'm already starting to do it. But that's a whole nother story. But what we will talk about, and this is my plan for Monday, just to give you a hint what's coming ahead, is my friend James and I are going to try to do a show where we talk. You'll like James. He's a Texan. It'll be an interesting contrast if we can actually pull this off. And if we can't do it on Monday, I might wait till next week. We're working through tech issues, but we're going to try to do something a little different for one of these shows where what we're going to do is we're going to talk about what is the algorithm. And I'm just going to tease that. I don't want to get into it tonight, but it isn't necessarily what you think. Let me share one other thing too, because I always like to share what I'm reading because you all have an interesting idea. This book is fantastic. Civilization 1, The World is Not As You Thought It Was. Talks about how the meter and the yard are actually really ancient forms of measurement that you can actually trace back astronomically if you wanted to, thousands of years before they were rediscovered, in the difference between how you would measure dry weight with seeds and wet weight with if you have water in there by volume, with the metric basically being a liquid measurement and imperial being a dry measurement. But you can actually trace it back through astronomy, and you realize that things were different way back when, that we had people who had better talents in astronomy than we've had up until basically the last 50 or 100 years, which really makes you question what is the prehistory of a lot of things. And we're going to go to some of those places because I think it's much more fascinating in a lot of ways than what's going on here, because we are going to have to look to the ancient past and what went wrong in the ancient cataclysms to begin predicting what sort of stupidity is going to be coming in this next decade. What we can do is start getting away from it. We know that the social credit scores are being put out there for total tracking. I'm sure many of you have been reading the stories like Tucker Carlson reported on. I actually had been talking about before that, about how the Canadians were looking at internment camps. In fact, when I was still doing Free Atlantic Radio before that got banned, I was actually telling you that they were putting out the contracts for these things. And no doubt those camps are being put there to house Americans as well. We see what's advancing through the state of New York very quickly, with the Senate now voting to support the bill that would allow basically internment camps in New York State. And this is what's happening. We see all these countries shutting down their borders, and you are being set up to be trapped in your own home. What to what end, to what purpose? These are the questions we have to answer. So we'll have to take a look at all that. And whatever, tell me your ideas. You're here, we're talking. Throw up a question, throw up a comment. I'll offer something. We'll have a good time with it. We're 33 minutes in. I am your host, Tom Kaczynski. We're still here in the Atlantic, up here in the heart of Maine, going ahead and talking about what's concerning to each and every one of you. Let's see what you all wrote here. We'll go back a little bit so I don't miss anything here. LBC crypto coin is the future. Interesting. All right. New York, California, writes Trinity or problems. CRISPR is how I get my AI cat girl GF. Please don't take this away from me. Eki, let me just tell you, Best Girl doesn't have robotic parts. You have to keep working on it. She has to be fully drawn, hand-drawn. You, of all people, should know, choose hand-drawn over CGI. I'm very disappointed on you. That was really autistic. All right. The Russian nationalist mindset is a template for Western civilization to avoid white erasure. In a war of Putin and Kamala, I would be for the advocate for white well-being. At least the Russians protect their people. The interesting thing about Russia is actually a much more polyglot culture than people realize. You have a lot of different Mongol descended tribes because it was part of the steppe for a long time. And there's a lot of different people in there. But, the whole anti-white jihad thing, I like to call it that, really is driven by sort of Marxism. And honestly, the worst participants in it are white people. White educated people who go to college have been so brainwashed that it's absolutely ridiculous, and they just don't know any better. I mean, I guess it's a tribute to how well they've been able to figure out the psychological programming. Maybe it's because I'm part Slav. It just doesn't make any sense to me. But for so many people to just go along with it. Let's see. Patches, glad to see you. Reagan destroyed the Second Amendment in California, made a permanent blue state with amnesty. The right are all traitors. Man, that's what the right exists to do. They exist to make money off being paid opposition. They're the equivalent of Al Snow showing up to go ahead, as part of the job squad and get pinned. For those of you who appreciate wrestling references. But for those of you who don't, what basically we're saying is they're controlled opposition. And look, they have been. The same people pay the paychecks. Nobody really wants to have things decentralized. If you really had people who were serious about it, and I'll tell you, this is why I started Free States when I did, but it didn't go anywhere, because everyone went back to the Republicans 5 seconds later because they love the media and they love the attention. And we're crack addicted, junkies to going ahead wherever the dopamine hits are. But what states need to do is they need to create state-level political parties that basically argue for autonomy at a minimum, and that are open to secession if things are, and they practice active non-compliance. Some of the things you see happening, you see DeSantis in Florida, Nome up there in South Dakota, and you see these interesting movements. You see the Minnesota lawmaker who wants to take 2/3 of the state and move it to South Dakota, or how a big chunk of Oregon was meeting with the Idaho state government, although Idaho is going to be lost too for the same reason, because the problem is these people who organize have a model. You talk about the Russian nationalist model, Grand Flash was saying, and you compare that with our model, which is the right still basically believes money is good, and as long as you do that and you give power to the banks, if the occultists are controlling you, pro tip, it's not going to end well. That's why we probably need to have a crusade against usury. I had said several times when I was running Coronavirus Central, and I think this remains true, we need a debt jubilee. You know what? And have people only own land to occupy. People don't think that way, but we need to establish a new center, and we need to have a new center that we don't compromise from. And at the center of it has to be morality, and it should be the Christian morality upon which we are founded, and for which we should be celebrating this weekend. And I hope you take some time to pray this weekend and think about the sacrifice and the triumphant success of Jesus Christ to conquer the evil as humanity. And this is one of the things that gets lost in this. We live in a society where we don't believe in evil. That's why I'm probably a good commentator. Not only do I believe in evil, I think that way sometimes, and I'll own that. And that way I can explain to you, when I imagine horrible things, I think of what I would do if I was going to screw someone over, and I talk about that in a way that lets you know what people actually do. We're like, oh, we won't do that. That's our leadership. That's our media. No one's that awful. Most people are that awful. They just don't always practice it. That's the choice of free will. And that's something you should work to cultivate. But the idea that there's nothing evil out there, that there's not going to be bad outcomes, and that people always mean what they say and say what they mean is absolutely absurd. And the people in government who want power are often the ones we should least trust. And I think that's a really important thing to consider. All right. Conservatives don't conserve anything. They play on a liberal arena, so we lose. Absolutely. Just tuned in. Quick rundown on the current situation in Ukraine. It's getting hot over there. We've seen shelling. We've been seeing some shelling going across the border a little bit. It is heating up, so we'll keep an eye on it. It might happen here. Not Buchanan, Brimelow, Tancredo, etc., but the libertarian right misses the point. Sure, absolutely. Just incredible. Russia at war. Ukraine is getting awful close in their separatist regions that Russia's backing. War or not will be the $64,000 question. I don't see why they wouldn't, because even if Russia goes to a peace table, and let's say they occupy Donetsk and Luhansk, the Ukrainian government will have to, and this is what the Russian sources say for what it's worth, is that Putin doesn't necessarily want to annex it all. He just wants recognition of the annexation of Crimea. I personally think he has a little bit broader idea than that, and I think his Chinese allies will prod him thusly. But whether you think one way or the other, it's a reasonable thing to say a defeated Ukraine who accepts terms at a peace table that everyone agrees to as a final peace settlement will lead to support from other countries in the West to settle it. And it will start with the Germans and the French, who want to have that oil coming in from Russia rather than from the Middle East. America does not want that, because America wants Europe dependent. And it's not really America. America never wanted anything to do with Europe, to be really honest with you. Most of us left there. And it works better if we do things differently. We are a frontier civilization, or at least we used to be before we got fat, dumb, lazy, and had soy lattes. What we would want to do, though, I think, is have a stable balance reached. And I think everyone needs to be smart about that and recognize you can't be everywhere. The Monroe Doctrine served us well for a very long time before the UK led us into one of their wars. If you don't believe me, go look up Zimmerman Telegram, Balfour Declaration, the story about World War I. If you don't know it at this point, why are you watching this channel? Honestly, if you didn't know that already, you probably wouldn't have found me. So if you don't, go read someone else to say it. You'll learn. All right. What do we have here? Peter Brimlow is really good. The only thing conservatives have conserved is their use of the word conservative. Why is it that the U.S. has 335 million people, not one is a registered congressional lobbyist for whites? Someone tried to do it, and the truth is, it's just you don't control the media. People don't realize how important it is to own the media. The media frames everything. We would be better off using another language. In fact, to start building something. I've even observed that in other languages, you don't see it as bad. It's absolutely crazy. The ruins of Atlantis are in Western Africa. Lemurians rise up. I like that. We're underdog guerrillas in this war. Why would we register as lobbyists? I will say something. You can't beat them using this money system. You do understand that. And I don't think crypto works either in the end. Crypto is useful because it lets you play the game and get around it. And it's probably going to be an imperative for survival in the not too distant future. But it ultimately is not an alternative. It's you fighting for a gradation of the same system. Pro tip, you're never going to beat the radical egalitarians in offering a lesser form of them. Because a lot of people I see go out to say, we're going to offer the equality of this group or that group. You need to go out there and you need to offer the word that they most make awful. We need to regain the word supremacy. And I think when we look for supremacy, the answer is we want moral supremacy. We want to say we are better than you and we can prove it idea by idea, and not go out there and say we're going to give way and compromise. Why would you compromise with evil? Well, you just say, like, I'm not going to murder you. I'm just going to rape you. That's the Republican policy of how they deal with the Democrats. And if we look like we're wounded PTSD people for voting for these people, one doesn't have to wonder too hard how we ended up in that position. It's the Rishat structure in Mauritania. We should form a party like Hezbollah. You know what? A funny thing about that, the Muslim Brotherhood, which is a lot of these actually did derive from, I should say, actually had the right idea that you begin building those sort of social clubs. And even if you go back further, let's not make it that ugly. You look at the way immigrants come over to countries. They used to build, different social clubs, the Italian club, the Polish club, the German club, whatever, the Scottish club. And we did that. We should build social clubs like that. You're absolutely right, Eki. That's a brilliant idea. I really supported for a lot of years the efforts of a guy named White Art Collective who did that really to help build up a sense of ethnic solidarity, which I think is a good thing, by the way, for white people, because you're going to be attacked for being white. You ought to at least have some friends who will help support you on that basis. If you don't go out there and say white people are awful and they should all die, please kill me. Please, sir, can I have another? Which is what they want you to do. Although, like I said, a lot of these end up being constructed a little bit too. So let's continue. The anti-white whites are the reason our civilization is under an immigration-fueled invasion. I'm going to tell you something that will surprise people. I actually feel bad for the immigrants because I think they get played. I think there's some very cynical people who are bringing these people over here. And look, their day may come when all of us are refugees too. We are becoming much more quickly and much more fully like South Africa than I ever would have imagined possible in the U.S. I'm sort of stunned by it, but I guess medical fears are a big thing. And it's harder to do things at home than it is to talk about sending your forces to do them. We're used to having mercenaries fighting our battles and not fighting around. And now we can't fight. We are stuck and we are trapped. And we basically need to ask to be liberated. Maybe that's what we should do. Maybe that's what we should do. Maybe every American, every red-blooded American should go out there every day and instead of putting up the stars and stripes, just put up a white flag. Let them know we're done. And you know what? Maybe someone will take mercy on us and remove them. When they see the only place the flag is standing left is in occupied Washington behind all those barriers they've put out there, maybe the lesson will come through. I don't know. What do you think? Is that brilliant or stupid? You tell me. All right. The necessary of exploring the shadow. You must view yourself as the bad guy to know you're not a bad guy. Aaron is absolutely right about that. But yeah, I've played the bad guy. And I will tell you, if you actually believe in something, at some point you will be the bad guy and people will attack you because we are a herd animal in so many ways. People are obsessed with conformity. And when they do that, they lose themselves. They lose all meaning. And I would rather be brave. I'm fortunate to have a very brave wife. We've lived a very brave life, and it has been rewarding, if difficult at times. And if I ever talk about getting away from it, it's not that I'm scared of a fight, but you have to fight for the right cause. You have to, if you're not willing to die for something, okay, you're a slave to your own thought of health. And I think a lot of people, by the way, are going to lose their souls to that in the next decade. I've talked about that many times before. But you have to know what you're about and at least be able to pick some places you're going to make a stand. And if you have a totally transactional view of nature just to protect your own interest, this whole thing doesn't work. None of it works. And we need people who are better than that. We need to be better than that. And it's hard because we worry about our material status. We worry about our comforts, all these different things. So I get that. All right. I heard there was a battle breaking off near Kirovsk right now. Well, I believe that. So, yeah, I mean, this thing is evolving very quickly. I will say, a little aside, 4chan has become absolute crap since, well, it's weird to talk of a decline of a cesspool, but the shills just run the site now. I mean, but I will say, if you want to keep an eye on things, there's a couple good Twitter feeds. I just like the Godlike Productions feed. I think they do a pretty good job of collating, and you can kind of see things as they're going there if you want to watch it. I'm sort of disappointed of the coverage of it over the internet, of how it's going, and I'm sort of disappointed that people don't see the strategic implications, and you don't see a lot of hard analysis. Everyone assumes that peace is the most beneficial outcome. For empires and states, it isn't. Well, I think it was Clausewitz who said war is the health of the state. For these states, it probably is good for the state to get into war. And for states that are struggling economically and political socially, it is. Now, our media says certain things, but when you look, it really is. All these countries are coming back to the idea that hard power actually matters, and they're sick of the U.S.'s crap. And the U.S. has been able to force project for a very long time. But I'll tell you, in this age of hypersonic missiles, I honestly believe if we get into a big war, the carrier fleet's going to be as dead as the battleships were at the beginning of World War II. And when people always want to try to win the last battle, I mean, you're looking for mobility and nimbleness. It's going to be whoever has drones, information warfare, and hybrid warfare. It's going to be, and it might be. I mean, I could see the first strike option maybe being used, and then we're in a whole new world. In which case, by the way, I will just say this. If the Russians ever go ahead and do something like that where they take out the big cities, we're just going to put independent New England together. We surrender. I'll just say right now, we surrender. We want an armistice. All we want to do is go eat fish and lobster and to tell some stories. That's it. And I know if you need to take, your pound of flesh, I can tell you every Marxist that's in this state. Do us a favor, send them to Siberia or something. Maybe they like education. Maybe they should get some. What else we got here? I'm tired, man. Can you tell? Are you guys tired too? It's just been a long thing. We should not only form a political party if we want to meet and befriend federal. Yeah, don't befriend federal agents. I've had that experience. They've rode my ass for years. Go back to when I was in there, and that's what they do. By the way, in case you don't know, they follow everyone, and they just they exist as mercenaries, and it makes me sad because they think they believe the lie of patriotism, and patriotism is just another form of dichotomy. If you don't know what your people are about, oh well, I support the law. Well, what's the law mean? You support I said so because I said so. You support. I mean, it's not elections, obviously. At this point, it's not morality. It's just, oh, I support the law. I mean, how trivial, I don't know. There are so many feds and dissident politics. By the way, I want to say this, and I'll just say this as a public confession. One of the reasons why the Free State Project failed is because half the damn people in there are feds or plants or the person who's always trying to sell you Bitcoin. Or I saw a couple girls were peddling their wares in a couple states. People had been deleting those posts. It's just like, but that's the way it is these days. I mean, and even the people who actually care about all they want to do is get together, bitch, and do some. I mean, it would take a lot more than that, and we don't have it in us. We don't have the core of people it would take, and we're not going to be permitted to. I mean, that's what you have to understand. And it's no accident. The divide and conquer thing was won at the individual level. The sort of things Yuri Bezmenov was talking about actually got played out, but they got played out within our hearts and consciences. And, those battles were won in school. So, the mind was lost before the body had a chance to fight. It's not good. Yeah, do read the Zimmerman telegram. I think that's true. The White American Liberation Party. One day, if it gets bad enough, I wonder if Derek Chauvin goes innocent, which, by the way, based on the evidence, I believe he probably should. And I'm not saying that because he's white, by the way. It has nothing to do with that. If I thought he killed the guy, I'd say he killed the guy. Look, this isn't Tom virtue signaling, because Tom says things that are not virtue signaling. It's just the facts of the case. And if you don't have a justice system that is blind, then you need to admit. I think officers should say, I'm a white officer, there's power in collective bargaining, and that you have collective identity, even if it is forced upon you. And that's part of the thing. Actually, ironically, you could probably learn something from how the black identitarians talk about this, because they say, well, we came from these tribes, but these were lost, so we take on this new identity. Identity is always part genetic, and it's always part fabricated, and we could fabricate different things. And this isn't the battle I'm looking to have, because it's not really going to fix anything, but it would just demonstrate to them that you shouldn't be wasting your energy on supporting a system that hates you. That's all it is. Let's see. You need to have parties open to public. Extreme vetting's a thing. Not everyone gets invited to layer 2. That is the thing here. Okay, let's see. The chants are all garbage now. Grand Flash. I thank you. That's the best idea ever, Tom. I wish I could upvote that one. What better flag for us to give a deraciated people that we are trying to make into the new white global nation than a simple white flag, or is that too? I think there's nothing. Look, the white flag is known as the international symbol of surrender. We surrender. It's fine. We're done. We're not going to play the game anymore. And then we leave. Then you take it down and you don't put it back up, because it ain't your flag anymore. It ain't your flag anymore. I don't think I could take the WALP seriously just because of the acronym. And look, your foundation, I will say, nations have to have a mythology that talk about what a thoughtful or smart or intelligent people they are. Ours will have to begin with a new story, an eruption from what happened previously. And what that means, and if you have a powerful enough story that happens to be true, or at least you believe it's true and act like it's true, that was the root of American exceptionalism, for instance. It was a little bit true because people believed it, and it was a whole lot of crap that people didn't believe, but it's the lie you sell yourself that makes culture a nation a lot of times, unless you base it in a deeper truth, which is, by the way, why you see faith chase history, because faith at least chases truth, whereas politics and culture chases utility, and politics traces bullshit. And that's kind of how that actually works, in my opinion. So those are some of my thoughts for today. I will hopefully be back on Monday. I can't promise it because we're trying something new technical. That would be something that would be very interesting to try, and we'll have some fun with that. But if in fact that doesn't happen, I will be gone for a little while working on some things. I am working to get the book edited. I hope each of you will consider purchasing it so that you have an opportunity to hear my thoughts. It's going to be very good. You'll enjoy it. It's about 140, 150 pages, I think, after final edits. I understand everyone's too depressed to read anything long. I don't want to write something that would bury you. I did throw a lot of big, heavy words. And for those of you who love to be black-pilled or, red-pilled or feel bad, I go in there and I give you the proverbial kick in the backside and kicks in other places that hurt even more than that, just so that you can remember that you shouldn't be fighting for the wrong thing. The good news is there is hope, and that is what this weekend ultimately should be about. So remember, as we go into Resurrection Sunday, as we, remember Christ's suffering on the cross and dying, that we are now coming to a thing where even in the worst of hours, even after death itself, victory became possible, because there are things that are bigger than life. And there's nothing bigger than the example of the Lord Jesus Christ, who told us that we should love our neighbors, and that gave us the directions to have a much better future if only we had the courage to find them. But we've forgotten that we are sinful creatures who will behold the evil. And why does that happen? Because we think we can change the world and make it a better place. And there's nothing wrong with that all the time. But remember, there is a little bit to be said for the fact that when you're doing something, don't always assume that you're the good guy and the others are the bad guy. Instead, think of what is right rather than who is right. And you might have better answers. And you will find that you can not only make friends, but even when you don't like people or don't want to live with people, you can get along much better. You don't have to force people. And if people are so different than you that we don't think the same, stop trying to make everyone believe the same thing. Let people live apart, and it's a pathway to peace. That's what we need to happen, where we have not one world order, not a new world order, but don't have a world order at all. Instead, we have people seeking their way to a much higher order, which is the service of the Lord Jesus Christ. So I want to say thank you to each and every one of you who's been here, and just offer a quick prayer before we close the show. If you have last minute questions, get them up now. Otherwise, I will see you on Monday. So, Heavenly Father, I just want to say, offer a prayer and praise and thanks for your Son, Jesus Christ, for what he did for us on the cross, for his triumph and resurrection and defeating evil and rising on the third day, for casting Satan back into the pit, and for giving us the pathway where we sinners, as terrible as we are, and all of us are, every one of us are, have the opportunity through repentance to take on metanoia, a new way of thinking, and to be able to find our way to that, recognizing that the lesson that Christ taught, that this world is ultimately lost unless we find a way to be born new men, and that is what we seek, to be born those new men, so that we can begin to enjoy this life and find triumph in that world which you have promised to us. So we ask that you look over each of every one of us, and as we go through these dangerous times, I just pray the blood of Jesus over the houses of all who are listening, and that hopefully those who are listening who have not found their way to the Lord begin searching so, and do not believe the lies they were told about him, because in truth he was the Lord of all, and the people who he was with, who hated him most, demonstrated just how remarkable and unique his nature was, which I understand, you understand, for which we are all grateful. So in the Lord's name I just ask that. Amen. So that is what I got for y'all. We'll go into some other things. Go get right. Don't be reprobates. Go to church on Sunday. Even if you don't feel like it, you know what? You'll meet a couple nice people. You'll integrate a little better into your community. I know a couple of you haven't gotten off the bed in a while. Go ahead and do it. I'm just joking. Anyway, you guys all have a good evening, and thank you for listening. We should have a really fun show on Monday if this works out. I'm going to try to do more conversation-based formats so we can go into some things, bring in some new information. I kind of know the big gist of things, but unless I really sit there and read, I don't have every little detail, and so we'll try to do that. If you are people who are interested in maybe doing something different, especially if you're a Christian and you're thinking of a way to get out, check in with me at Atlantic Homeland over on Telegram. Other than that, have a good evening. Love you guys. Bye. In stream.